Hello, hello, hello. My name is Robert. I am the recovery guy, and you have entered into The Fix.
Thank you, that affirmative vote. I always appreciate when people vote yes for me. It's part of the ego. Sorry?
There you go.
There we go. Part of the ego that I've never wanted to lose. Anyway, my name is Robert, and I am a recovered alcoholic.
Hi, Robert.
My sobriety date is April 25th of 1986. So I've been sober, 14,384 days. But who's counting, right? And I tell people all the time that I am counting, because as you well know as Al-Anons, the longest day of an alcoholic's life is the day that they're drinking. I've never known a longer day than when I was active in my alcoholism, because I had to plan everything out. I had to be so strategic to keep my wife from leaving me, walking out on my children, keeping my job, and still being able to be drunk in the meantime. And it was hard work. And so I find that the longer I'm sober, the shorter my days become. Does that make sense? And I've done some things over the years, because in actuality, the life that you see now I owe to Alcoholics Anonymous. To this day, I go into treatment centers, I have a sponsor, I'm a student of the Big Book, and I go to meetings on a regular basis. The same things I do today were the things that I did 39 years ago. And the same things that individuals who were strategic in my personal recovery are still doing the same thing, which is kind of neat, because I spoke at a treatment center last night up in Heber City, and a lot of the young people were there, and I don't have to tell them anything different than what I was told. You clean house, you trust God, and you work with others. And if a person is willing to follow that formula, which is your formula as well, then we can live happy, joyous, and free regardless of the circumstances. And I have found, it's very interesting, and I was telling my friend Heather before the meeting, I was sober about 2.5 years, and one more failed relationship. And the person I went to talk to didn't give me the news I was looking for, because I went and I wanted it to be about somebody else. I wanted it to be about her. I didn't want it to be about me. But it was another failed relationship, but this time I was sober. And so I went and described how bad she was to me. And he said, and I sat back and I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "I think you take hostages. I don't think you have relationships." So I had to debate right then and there, was this the last time I spoke to that person or not? And he told me something very interesting, which challenged my alcoholic thinking from the get-go. He said, "Do you love them so you need them, or do you need them so you love them?" Which was an incredible concept, because that took me looking at me. I wanted to look at them. Even though I was sober, I wanted it to be about them. I didn't want it to be about me, because I was tired of looking at me. I was tired of being the source of things that went wrong. And my alcoholism journey, recovering from alcoholism, has been about an inside job that would dictate the outside of me, instead of the outside of me dictating the inside of me. But the first thing I had to do, I had to see myself as a very sick person. Now, granted, I did some bad things, but I did bad things not because I was bad. I did things because I was sick. And I had to recognize that I had a phenomenon of craving that distinguished me to be different than the average drinker. I've been married over 36 years, and I'm married to a person who drinks. I was in the bar business for a long time, so I know the problem isn't alcohol. That's why when she comes home from work, I say, what do you want to drink? The alcohol is not the enemy. It's the enemy if I consume it, but it's not the enemy. And I had to realize that it was about me and me and me alone. That's why in the forward to the first edition it says we recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body to show others how we have recovered is precisely why we wrote this book. They go on to say that they hope this book is so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. And I had to realize that I wasn't helpless and hopeless. It just seemed that way. And it seemed that way from when I was young. You know, when you're 5 and 6 years old, you shouldn't have to contemplate things like your own value. But I remember crying myself to sleep when I was 5 and 6 years old, and my dad, who was alcoholic, would say, God bless you and God is your life. So he tried to incorporate God into the house as he was getting drunk. And I remember laying there at night thinking, if God is real, why does it hurt so much being me? And I ended up so confused that I ended up went into bed because I had extreme anxiety. I went to bed until I was 11 years old. And then, when I was 14 years old, I discovered alcohol. Boy, was that mind-altering. And that was a game changer for me. And I remember drinking the first time because I could get away with it. My dad had passed out, my parents had passed out, and we took what we had and we sat under the tree and we drank. And so I drank the first time because I could get away with something. The second time I drank, it was because of how it made me feel the first time I drank. When you come from nothing and you are nothing, and you're always going to be a nothing, and you discover that one substance that makes you feel like an almost, you're on top of the world. And I knew I was never going to be anything. And when you're convinced that you're never going to be nothing, being an almost is everything. You know what I'm saying? So I captured the next few years as a periodic drinker, because in high school you could only drink so much, otherwise you'd be found out. So I was a periodic drinker. Then when I was 18 years old, and this is the insanity of alcoholism, I remember walking into the registrar's office, and I said, I'm dropping out of school. This was January of 1972. And I could have not shown up and graduated in May. But I had to let it be known that I was going to drop out of school. And the register, I remember them saying, you can't do that. And I held up my license and I was proud. And I said, I can do anything I want. I'm 18 years old today. And at that point, they had to let me drop out. It was the first opportunity of, I'll show you, I'll kill me. And it set a course of destructive behavior, because by this time, F. Scott Fitzgerald says, first a man takes a drink, then the drink takes a drink, then the drink takes the man. And I took the first drink when I was 14 years old, and by the time I was 18 years old, the drink started to take a drink. And I didn't realize it because I would call it anything else but an addiction to a substance. Who wants to admit? Bill Wilson, the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, says, who likes to admit complete defeat? Practically no one. And at 18 years old, I wasn't ready to admit defeat about anything. I was always going to be right regardless of what I did wrong. But this particular day, alcohol started to make a decision for me. And it set into motion a series of failed opportunities that it would always be you, it would never be me. Because if it was me, I had to look inside, and I probably had to look at my alcohol consumption. And I was telling some people last night, if I asked you not to breathe, you would say, Robert, if I stop breathing, I'll die. Well, alcohol became that for me. Alcohol became breath. And as Father Martin would say in his Chalk Talk, he says that protecting the supply is the number one objective of any true alcoholic. And so I learned how to begin protecting the supply, and I was willing to give away anything that was jeopardizing that supply. And I went along and I started to go down this path of destructive behavior. And I'm 18 years old. And there wasn't a marriage. I went into the Air Force when I was 18 in the summer, and I never got out of basic training. And it was interesting. They gave me a general discharge, and it said, inability to adjust to military life. That's what it said. And you could have crossed out the word military and said inability to adjust to life, and you would have been more right. Because it wasn't just the military. Because I went to this thing called motivation. Motivation was the next thing before the brig, before they threw you in jail. And I remember a tech sergeant, because you were severely punished if you went outside their rules, outside their boundaries. And I remember him coming up to me and saying, "What are you doing here? You know, if you go back to your flight, you could be the most promising airman we've had." And I said, "Well, I'm here because I'm in trouble." And under strict guidelines, I could perform. If you threatened me at that point, I would perform the way you wanted me to perform. But if you gave me any latitude whatsoever, anything at all, any wiggle room, any way to get out, I would take it and I would get drunk. And it wasn't long before I went back to my flight, Lackland Air Force Base in Texas, and they gave me a discharge. And I think the psychologists thought I had a Valium deficiency, because that's what they sent me home with. Unopened, unscripted, unending source of Valium, which, you know, to any alcoholic, you know, I remember laying by the pool one day, and I had this funny smell. I said, "Man, what is that smell?" And it smelled like flesh was burning. And I realized I dropped a cigarette on my chest, and it was my own flesh burning. But because I had a Valium deficiency, I just took another Valium and drank another Coors and had another shot of whiskey, and I was fine after that. But that's how we live our life. And in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was a real turning point for me. And on page 30, it says, "Most of us have been unwilling to admit that we were alcoholics. No person likes to admit that he is bodily or mentally different from his fellows." And it goes on, "Therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people." And I wanted to be normal, but I still wanted to drink. And so I would go to parties. By this time I was married, and that would end in disaster. And here I am, 26 years old, living in Las Vegas, and I just moved there, and I'm wondering why life isn't any different. And I tell people all the time that moving to Las Vegas from Southern California turned a fender bender into a full head-on collision. It was like cutting the elevator cord when you're on the top floor and having the elevator crash. And when I hit my bottom disastrously. Alcoholics, we hear voices. Some are real, some are imagined, but they're voices that we hear are people that we disappointed along the way. And I can remember ex-wives by this time, family members, my mom and dad, and they were saying, Bobby, what are you doing? And on February 9th of 1986, I woke up and I had lost another paycheck at Davies Locker. I drank at really fine institutions. And I drank for free. The only requirement was you were willing to gamble away your paycheck. Because by this time, I'd become alcoholic, I'd become bulimic, compulsive overeater, drug addict, you name it. Larry's Villa, I was their greatest customer. I would have relationships with people I would never see again. I was that kind of person. I was trying to find a way, because at some point alcohol wasn't enough for me. I had to explore other things that would fill in the gaps that alcohol could not create, because I could only drink so much. I became a drug addict because I figured this out. This made perfect sense at the time. If I did a certain amount of crystal methadone or cocaine or crack, I could stay up 4 and 5 days at a time instead of having remorse every single day. This made perfect sense. Tell you how insane I really was. I could cut the remorse down from 5 and 6 and 7 days to 2 days a week. And when you wake up knowing the disappointment that you are every single day, and you folks here, you know it more than anyone, the disappointment that the alcoholic feels when they realize they've let down one more time the person that they want to love so badly, but they just can't get past the alcohol. But here's what the turning point for me. I woke up on February 9th of 1986, and for the first time, there were no voices. No one was in the room anymore. And I looked in the mirror and I realized that if something didn't change, I was going to die. I was 32 years old. And I was going to die. And there was nothing I could do about it. And when you want to live as badly as I wanted to live, and you know you're going to die, it's a scary thing. It's scary if you're 50, it's scary if you're 60, but being 32 with your whole life ahead of you, and you know you've disappointed everyone along the way, but realizing that you're going to die, for me, that was the most challenging proposition I've ever been faced with. And that day, I went into treatment on February 9th of 1986. And I remember I'd lost my job the previous day. I was a room service waiter at the Las Vegas Hilton, and I'd lost all my money. And I started making phone calls. And I'd call treatment centers, and they'd say three things. Do you have insurance? Do you have any money? Do you have a job? No, no, no. Click, click, click. And finally I came across a treatment center, Nevada Treatment Center on Martin Luther King Boulevard in Las Vegas. And they said, if you can get here in 30 minutes with $50, we'll talk to you. And back in 1986, $50, you know, it could buy you at least 2 bags of groceries. Now it can buy you maybe 1. And I called my dad up. My dad was sober at this time. And I said, Dad, if you'll loan me $50, because he knew I didn't have any money, and you could come and get me, because the state of Nevada had this thing where they actually would take your license, and my car was already repossessed. I was that kind of drunk. And my dad came and got me, and he took me to the Nevada Treatment Center, and that became my journey. And I would be sober 71 days, and I would go to meetings on a regular basis, because by this time I was unemployable. And it was a challenge to me, because as much as I wanted to be like the other people in the room, I couldn't be, because they had this element of sobriety, and it was called honesty. And I couldn't be honest. I was so afraid that if you knew who I was, you wouldn't like me. And when you're at the last house on the block, if one more person tells you to go away, I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know where I was going to go. And I would hear them say, keep coming back. It works if you work it. I heard all those cliches. And for somebody else that might have been true, but you didn't know me. You didn't know where I'd gone. You didn't know the people I'd walked down. And you didn't know that I was the guy who moved his children out of the way just to go drink, or carry on an affair while a wonderful wife was at home waiting for me. I was the kind of person that you could ask me to go out for milk, and 3 days I would show up later and I would not remember why you asked me to go out in the first place. That's who I became. And here I was, faced with honesty or drinking. And I couldn't be honest, because I knew if you knew what I knew, you would ask me not to come back. So I went out and I drank. And I ended up at the Red Butler Motel on 15th and Fremont, because I tried to show up at my dad and mom's place, and my mom was at work and my dad was there, and he said, "You can't stay here. You have to go." And I remember my dad taking me to the Red Butler Motel, and if you're familiar with Las Vegas at all, it was in a very swanky place. You paid by the week. And it was on a place, it was in 15th and Fremont, which is nicknamed Heroin Heights. So give you a further idea of where I sunk to. And my dad dropped me off there. Like I say, my dad was sober about 7 years at the time. And this is what my dad said to me: "Your mother and I aren't going to watch you die." That was my dad. The last person who would find any value in me. "We're not going to watch you die," because that's what happens to alcoholics who don't get well. We die. And we die from a treatable condition. It's not like we have stage 4 pancreatic cancer and the doctor says, "Go enjoy your last 6 months because we can't do anything for you." We actually die from a treatable condition, because no matter how far down the scale we have gone, we can get help, we can get well, we can recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Because remember, we're never hopeless state of mind and body. It just seems that way to the alcoholic, and that creates such a pain that the only thing that we think we can do is drink to get over that pain. Because Father Martin one more time says, alcohol would put to sleep that which would make you feel uncomfortable. And the dynamic is, what do you do if you're uncomfortable with you? What if you realize that you're the problem? What if you realize that everything, it's no longer about them, it's about you, and you're a runaway freight train that has no brakes. And it's not a matter of if it's going to crash, it's a matter of when it's going to crash and how much damage it's going to do. And my dad said to me, "Your mother and I aren't going to watch you die." And 9 months later, and this is guaranteed to every alcoholic who actually approaches sobriety with the right frame of mind, reading the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. In 9 months, my dad would say he was over for Christmas, he and my mom, and he gave me a hug, he gave me a watch, which I still have to this day, and he said, "Your mother and I, we used to worry about you, but we don't worry anymore." And that's called recovery. So I'm in this hotel room, and I'm trying to recapture that feeling of being an almost. And I couldn't do it, and I was staying there, and I was lonely, and I knew I didn't want to die. I didn't have the courage to kill myself, and I knew I couldn't live with alcohol, so it made sense. The only people I had ever known who asked me to come back, regardless of what they knew about me, was in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And on April 25th, 1986, I walked back into the rooms, and I became an alcoholic for the first time. There's a part in the big book that says we have to concede to our innermost self that we were alcoholic. This is the first step in recovery. And for that moment, I knew I was alcoholic, but honesty stood in the way. I was willing to be honest. And talk about a God moment. My sponsor, Max Brooks, was in the room an hour after a meeting he didn't go to. He never went to the late lunch bunch, but he was there that day, as if he was waiting for me. He didn't know I was going to show up, and I didn't know he was going to be there. But I walked strategically into the back room because I didn't want anyone to see me. I was so embarrassed because I talked a good talk. I just wasn't walking a good walk. I was trying to be chameleon. I was trying to be what I thought you wanted me to be. And I was not what I needed to be. And that's why I went out and drank. And I went back in and I said to Max, he didn't say, "Where have you been?" He said, "Are you ready?" I said, "Yeah, Max, I'm ready. What do I do?" And he said to me, "Get on your knees because we're going to do the third step prayer." And we sat and prayed together. And I said to Max, I said, "What do I do next?" He said, "Everything I tell you to do." He said, "I can be your sponsor or I can be your friend. you tell me what you want me to be, because I can't be both. If we're going to be friends, let's go have lunch. If I'm going to be your sponsor, you need to get to work. And I started my journey then and there. And I raised my hand in a different way because I had conceded to my innermost self. All of a sudden, admitting that I was alcoholic, that my life had become unmanageable, I started looking at that for the first time in my entire life. And all of a sudden, at 32 years old, I began to see a glimpse of who I could be. Because the men and women I saw in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I knew they were like me because they shared stories that were similar to mine. But yet they were in wonderful relationships. They had this thing called a job where they actually showed up on a Monday instead of a Tuesday or a Wednesday at 8 a.m. instead of noon, and they had a car that wasn't repossessed. The state of Nevada let them drive. All these weird things. And I thought, I want to be like you. What do I have to do to be you? Because I'm tired of being me. And I was about 6 months into my sobriety. And I knew something was wrong. Something was missing. I was going to meetings. I was reading my big book. I had a sponsor. I was doing all the things necessary. And I went to my sponsor, Jack, and I said, Jack, there's something about what I'm doing is not enough. I need to know what I can do, because I'm afraid right now if I go back out, I'm never coming back. And if I don't find what the missing ingredient is, it's like baking a cake. If you don't add eggs, if you don't add flour, if you don't bake it right, it's not going to turn out the way you want it to turn out. It may look like a cake, but it doesn't taste the way you want it to be. And that's where I was. But now we're dealing with my life. And I went to Jack and said, what is it about me that I would need to make sure that I would never drink again? And he looked at me and he said, the only thing I see missing about you is service. If you add service to what you're already doing, you'll never drink again. And this is really important. And those of you who are in Al-Anon, I'm glad you're here today, because part of our journey is to get well so we can help the next person who comes in. Because if we're not well, what do we have to give them? We have nothing to give them. And on Roman numeral 17 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, let me find it here. It says, it is also indicated that strenuous work with another alcoholic was vital to bring about permanent recovery. And that's what I wanted. I didn't want to be an almost anymore. I wanted permanent recovery. But permanent recovery comes through action. Permanent recovery doesn't it doesn't come to you while you're sitting on the couch doing nothing, wishing things would be different, because that's how I was. I would sit in a bar wondering why my life was falling apart, instead of being out and being active, helping other people. Zig Ziglar, who is the greatest goal teacher of all time and a motivational speaker, says if you want to be successful, go help enough other people be successful, and by extension, you will be successful as well. And that's what it's talking about here, is vital. And vital is an interesting word. Vital comes from the Latin vita, and vita is life. So if I wanted to live a recovered life, I had to go help another alcoholic. That's why you're here at this fall conference. You're learning the tools and getting in your toolbox of things that you need to help the next person coming in who's faced with the same despair that you felt when you first got in these rooms, that they don't have to go through what you maybe had to go through on your journey. And that's why we're here. That's why I'm here. That's why Phil's here. That's why Heather's here. Because we're not done. And no matter how far, no matter how long we're sober, we're never quite done. I never want to wake up and be finished. And I often think of my sponsor who talks about step 10. And step 10 is continue to take a personal inventory, and when, not if, when we were wrong, promptly admit it. So my sponsor says, if I don't clear away the wreckage of my present, it will become the wreckage of my past. Which is a very interesting, which encourages me to do step 10 every day. But step 10 is 10 steps further in. If you're not willing to surrender, because if I don't surrender, why would I be willing to believe that my life is insane and that my approach to living is insane? Why would I, if I don't surrender, why would I be willing to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood it? Right? It doesn't make any sense. As long as I'm clinging to the fact that I can do this, then I don't need a higher power. I don't need something to do for me what I can't do for myself, because I'm just fine right where I'm at. And that's the way many of us are, certainly in the life of an alcoholic. And on page 83 of the big book, actually 85, it talks about we feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We have not even sworn off. This is talking about alcohol. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We're neither cocky nor are we afraid. That is our experience. This is how we react as long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. And what's wonderful about that is no matter where you're at, no matter where we are at in our journey, the fifth spiritual condition meets us where we're at. So my understanding of God is evolved than it was when I was a newcomer in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I tell people all the time, I was 7 years sober before I zeroed in on who God was in my life. 7 years. In the meantime, the group, where God was obviously doing for the group what I wanted God to do, and the group became my higher power. I had a friend of mine, interesting story. He said his name was Jim, and he was a lucky alcoholic. He would say the tide goes in and the tide goes out, and I don't get drunk in between. Not a bad thought. And I remember I was vacationing in Daytona Beach, and I was watching the ocean, and sure enough, stopping the tide is like trying to stop lava. It's impossible, because the tide is controlled by the moon, and we don't have any control over that. So the tide going in, the tide going out, you can't stop. And you can't stop our higher power. But if we don't have a higher power, why do we expect a higher result? We need to stay in fifth spiritual condition, and that's what the steps teach us how to do. We start with step 1, and we admit we're powerless over alcohol, that our life had become unmanageable. Based on that degree of unmanageability, I had to understand that only an insane person would do the things that I would do and call them sanity. Why is everyone in my life, everyone that mattered to me, why are they leaving? Why are they wrong and I'm the only one right? When I have nothing to show for it, I can't even pay rent. I remember living in Las Vegas, again at these classy motels, where they would lock you out on a Friday if you didn't pay your rent. They would literally lock you out with all your stuff inside. And unless you came up with the money, you couldn't get your stuff. And I wasn't able to afford that. I lost so much stuff. And I would defend my drinking as you would defend breathing. And that's how far I had gone. And walking into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous was a game changer for me. Just like walking into Al-Anon. And some of you have a problem with alcohol. Most of you have a problem with an alcoholic, right? But there's a commonality. There's a common thread that binds us. And on page 17 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it talks about that. And hopefully you can relate to it. It says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who are just once as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. And then it talks about we are average Americans, all sections of this life and many of its occupations are represented as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix, but there exists amongst us a friendliness and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. And then Bill talks about a boat. And you can picture the boat from steerage to captain's table. The steerage is represented by people who are lucky to be on the boat. They could muster enough of the fare to be on the inside of the boat. And the captain's table are the people who walk in these circles with all the money. They know all the right people and they dine with the captain. When that ship is shipwrecked and both people are in the water, do you think any of that matters? Nothing matters. The only thing that matters is, am I going to be saved? Is something going to quiet the madness that is going on inside of me? And that is a process, though. Because not only do we have to rely on a power greater than ourselves, we have to become willing to turn our will and our life over to the care of God. And a lot of times, step 3 is misconstrued, is misread, it's misheard, it's mistaught. It says, became willing. It doesn't say you did it. It doesn't say you know who your higher power is. It just says you became willing to turn your will and your life over to the care of God as you, the individual, understood God. And that's what's one of the miraculous things about the program of recovery. It doesn't matter whether you're Catholic, whether you're Baptist, whether you believe in trees, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Judeo-Christian, whether you're Judaism, it doesn't matter. What matters is your higher power. It doesn't merely matter who your higher power is, it matters what your higher power does. And that's the defining element for us. So we come in and we become willing to turn our will and our life. We don't even have to know who God is. But at some point we have to clean out the closet, and that is step 4. We have to take a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And then we have to admit in step 5, admit to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And we already know the exact nature of our wrongs, because a friend of mine told me it's 3 o'clock in the morning and the lights are out and nobody else is there. You know what the truth is about you. And God, who can see everything at all times, already knows. I just have to get honest enough to admit it to you, to tell you why I'm afraid, to tell you what I've done in my journey of destruction. Because every time I got close to being well, I would burn my life to the ground one more time. And there's something wrong with the person who will do that. The problem was I'm an alcoholic. And every time I'd get close to that level of honesty, that level of restoration, the minute you would let pressure off of me, I would do what I've always known to do, and that's to drink. And the drink would sideline me, just take me out of the game completely. And so I had to admit those things, the exact nature of my wrongs. And then in step 6, I have to be entirely ready to have God remove those defects of character, because we all have defects. There's nothing wrong with having a defect. There's something wrong with having a defect that you're not ready to be removed. And then in step 7, we humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. And I was telling my friend earlier, the difference between a defect of character and a shortcoming. If you have a flat tire, that is a defect of character. If you don't have a spare, that's a shortcoming. And it's the same way with our life. There's something I'm lacking that causes me to self-destruct, but there's something I don't have that prevents me from fixing it. And then in step 8, I made a list of all persons we are, and I come across so many people in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous who are afraid of that step. And I tell them, oh, you're just making a list. If you want to be afraid of anything, be afraid of step 9. We have to go and make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. And a lot of times we get that step. It's like we don't read the step. I need you to tell me I'm okay. But what if I've harmed you to the point where you don't want to have anything to do with me, but I'm sincerely sorry? I have to be willing to say I'm sorry to you for the things that I've done, regardless of what you think of me when I'm finished with that amends. I have to think it's okay. You may still think I'm the worst person in the world. I'm not making the amends for you, although you deserve it. I'm making the amends because I need to make the amends. It's part of house cleaning. So I tell people all the time that steps 1, 2, and 3 are surrender steps. Steps 4 through 9 are recovery steps. But I am a recovered alcoholic because I stay in recovery. And unless, Sir Isaac Newton said, things that are in motion tend to stay in motion, things that are at rest tend to stay at rest. So I want to stay in motion the whole time. So Joe and Charlie, who are big book aficionados in the AA circle on everything AA, talk about steps 10, 11, and 12. We commonly refer to steps 10, 11, and 12 as maintenance steps. And they're not really maintenance steps, they are growth steps. And I want you to look at steps 10, 11, and 12, the parallel of our programs, as you growing. Because Joe and Charlie would say they challenge anyone to do steps 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis and not grow. Because what I'm doing is I'm looking at my life. If I'm looking at my life, I'm automatically, people ask me all the time, how many, you find a lot of people who've done 5 step 4s. They've done step 4 5 times. They ask me how am I doing. I've done 1 step 4 because I do step 10. Step 10 says continue to take a personal inventory, and when I'm wrong, properly admit it. What is an inventory step? 4 is an inventory step. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory. So if I'm continuing that, why do I need to go back if my desire and my goal is to go forward? So I do step 10 on a regular basis. And as long as my sponsor, I clear away the wreckage of my present so it doesn't become the wreckage of my past, I no longer have, this is just my theological approach to AA, and it is a religion to me. And religion isn't assigned to a God. Religion is how I approach my personal recovery. It's a very distinctive difference. And so I continue to take and when I'm wrong, I promptly admit it. So I'm cleaning out my closet on a regular basis. I'm waking up every day. I was this good yesterday. How good could I be today? What if I go and I say, I'm sorry to you? What if I'm nicer to the person in Walmart? What if I'm nicer to the person at the stoplight? What if I'm nicer to my grandchildren? What if I'm a better father? What if I'm a better husband? What if I'm a better me? How good can this thing really get? And that's what I want to know. How good can it get? Because I don't want anyone who will mourn after my passing, and I hope there's at least a room full of them. I don't want them to say what Robert could have been. I want them to see me as what I became. And that should be the goal of every one of us. What I became in my journey of recovery. And then I do step 11, where I sought through prayer and meditation to improve, not establish, to improve my conscious contact with God as we understood, praying only for the knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. It says in the big book, it says, for we're not cured of alcoholism. What we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. And then it says, every day is a day I must take God's vision into all my activities. And that's what step 11 is all about. So I sought through prayer. Prayer is when I petition to God. Meditation is when I listen to God. And I need to do a lot more listening than I need to do praying. But I sought through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact, paying only for the knowledge of His will for us. You know what my knowledge of God's will for me is? It's you. Again, if I want to feel better about me, it's always you. If I'm not willing to be third, I'll never be first. If you want to be first, which who doesn't want to be first? There's nothing wrong with wanting to be first. It's how I get to be first. How do you get to be happy, joyous, and free? It's helping the next person become happy, joyous, and free. And if you have not incorporated that into your personal recovery, incorporate it. And it will be game-changing for us. It always is. Because a biblical principle is, if you want to be first, you need to be last. And I didn't make it up. God did. The God I serve made it up. And I think the God you would serve would want that for you as well. Because God wants us to have everything we've ever wanted. We just need to treat God's kids as we want God to treat us. And God puts us first, so we need to put other people first before our own wants, before our own needs. And it's miraculous how my own needs and my own wants become fulfilled in serving other people. And then I get to step 12, and I establish, I recognize that spiritual awakening as a result. It doesn't just happen as a result of these steps. So there's a reason why I'm having a spiritual awakening. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result, so it means I've done something. The result is something that happens based on what I've done. And if I want to have a spiritual awakening, I need to do the steps. If your life is not happy, joyous, and free, I know why. Not because I'm real smart, but I've read the book. And many of you have read the book as well. And you're happy, you're joyous, and you're free. And many of you haven't read the book and you're not. I guarantee you that the fulfillment you find is in your Al-Anon literature, is in your recovery literature. And that will tell you that we get well, not because I need to get well. We get well for the other person. And then I try to carry the message. I want everyone to pick up the ball and run as I've explained it. But I know that's not going to be true. I know there's going to be some people that says, yeah, he was okay, but I've got my own path. And that's fine. If you're happy, joyous, and you're free, I don't care. I just want you to be well. But the reason that you're here is to learn more about our condition. And our condition is to become well while learning how to live in an unbalanced world. But the only way we can find balance is helping other people become balanced. We try to carry the message, just like step 9. I don't need you. I want you to not think I'm a jerk. I want you to think I'm sincere. I want you to think I'm sincerely sorry for the things that I've done to you, but it's not essential to my step 9. So when we get to step 12, we've had a spiritual awakening as a result of this step. We tried to carry the message. That word "tried" doesn't mean we succeeded. I was telling a friend of mine, there's this thing called the rule of thirds. Very interesting concept. One of my psychology professors, Dr. Nessman, taught me. A rule of thirds is, by the way, all of you look fantastic today, but I know a third of you say, this guy's been speaking a long freaking time. When is he going to shut up? And then a third of you are knitting or doing something menial, and you could care less. Oh, I just had lunch, and I'm okay right where I'm at, and he can talk as long as he wants to talk. And a third of the people think I'm absolutely brilliant. And I want you to agree. I want you to know that I agree with the bottom third. But all of you look the same. I don't know who you are. You're all smiling at me. You all look reasonably attentive. You're fabulously good looking. And so I think you're all the same. But I know that that's true. And that's statistically just true. But if I speak to you as if I know who you are, I'm going to marginalize what I say. And all I'm responsible, all Amy and I talked about in setting this up, was trying to carry a message of hope, of recovery, of deliverance, of becoming well. And then what do I get to do? I want this to be about me. Because I still have an ego. By the way, the ego's number one responsibility is to convince me it doesn't exist. And your ego is the same. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a very good ego, which is hilarious to this mind. And so I practice the principles in all my affairs. What does that word "all" mean? If it's all, there's nothing left over. So everything I do has to be about all, or it's about nothing. So having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, I tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles. and all my affairs. And when I do that, the world's going to be crumbling down around me. I have a daughter that said to me, and I'm 24 years sober at the time. She said to me, "Dad, we may never have a better relationship than what we have right now. If that's okay with you, we can be fine. If not, I can't help you." She set a boundary, and I had harmed her so much, she wasn't allowing herself to get past that. And she'd put a limit, and I wanted to be so much to her. I wanted her to understand how badly I felt over harming her when I walked out, when I left. And I want so much that she would be open and free, but she's just not. I have to be okay with that. I have to say, I've done everything I can do. What more can I do? I'm a good husband. I'm a good father. I'm a good grandfather. I'm trustworthy. I'm all the things that I wish I could have been when she was young. I just wasn't because of alcohol. And we have to approach others the same way. We can only try and leave everything else up to God, because God will do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And if there's anything I can leave you with today, is never give up. Never stop trying. Just because we stay with a person or we leave a person doesn't mean we've given up. Because if we're not well, nothing is going to be comfortable outside of us. Recovery is an inside-out approach. It's not outside in. I don't need someone else to validate who I am. I would like that person to validate me. Who wouldn't? But it's not necessary for me. I have to learn how to abase, and I have to learn how to abound in my personal journey of recovery. And it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. And Amy, thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Robert, and I'm a recovered alcoholic. Thank you.